It's AM 1310, The Light.
And welcome back to the Community Connection. I'm Tony LaMont, your host, and it's so good to be with you on this Friday, Community Friday, as we open up the lines. I want to thank everybody for calling in, who did call in the conversation about Starbucks and your opinions, and I appreciate all the things that you said. I just hope more than anything else that we continue an open dialogue about these kinds of things. I think the incident that did happen, for lack of a better term, happened for a reason. It is a learning opportunity. The question is, what are you going to learn? And in the studio with me right now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I have Mr. George Wolfe, and he is a candidate for the Secretary of State, and he is from the Green Party. So welcome, sir.
Thank you, Tony. Nice to be with you.
Okay, so first thing I have to ask. Okay,
sure.
Green Party. So we know, of course, Democratic, Republican, Independent. Give me, what is the Green Party?
Well, the Green Party started actually in 1984. It was originally a party which, originally a movement to focus on the environment, conservation, ecology, and so forth. And as time went on in the 90s and then the early 21st century here, expanded to become a full-fledged political party, which expanded its values to four pillars. We say the Green Party has four pillars: ecological wisdom, grassroots democracy, nonviolence, and social justice. And that's the essence of the values of the Green Party that Green Party candidates hope to bring to the political culture and change the political culture so that it can be more environmentally sensitive, and it can focus on nonviolence and also grassroots democracy. We're really opposed to having big money come into politics and try to imitate influence politics. So we don't take money from large corporations. We don't take the idea that corporations can be like individuals and give billions of dollars to candidates or whatever. We don't support that. We're a grassroots organization. We take donations from individuals, and it's a much more kind of a wholesome, honest way to manage a campaign.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know in the research I saw that, and I thought to myself, okay, when I talk to George, I have to ask him, because from a competitive standpoint, not taking that kind of money, everyone knows that nowadays, even for some very small positions in the political realm, millions of dollars are spent because they know those positions are powerful positions. So for your party to take a look at it and say it's a grassroots campaign, how can you become competitive in that sense as the Green Party when you're being outspent in many cases probably 20-1?
Well, we think we are becoming competitive because we have a slogan: we can make big change without big money. And one thing that's making that possible is the social media that's available today. That's all low cost, and also people like you to have me on the station. You see, the avenues for communication, websites and so forth, are much more vast than they were 30 years ago. So we're having an impact. A recent poll said that I'm getting 8% of the vote now. That's way more than what we expected at this particular point. And especially since the primary season here and the attention is so much on other candidates that have primaries. So, I think the environment has changed. The media environment has changed to support grassroots activism and grassroots democracy.
What made you take a look at the position of Secretary of State?
Well, I was recruited. I was, director of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies at Ball State University for several years, and I was also involved as the outreach coordinator. So I got very interested in nonviolence, and I had an opportunity to go to India and be exposed to Gandhi's philosophy and so forth, and that led me into studying Martin Luther King more and whatever. So I've had a deep interest in the idea of nonviolence, and I went to the Green Party convention here last June, and they were interested in recruiting me to run for Secretary of State. So I got interested more and more in that possibility, and I decided to take on the challenge. And I also chose Secretary of State. One reason we chose Secretary of State is because if the candidate running for Secretary of State gets 2% of the vote, they no longer have to petition to get on the ballot. We got automatic ballot access. And so, and also I liked running for Secretary of State because it's not competing with a senator or a representative. In other words, I'm not taking votes away from some other candidate or party candidate that votes in Congress. So that way a person can vote, Democratic or Republican, whoever they want, but they can also vote for me, and they're not voting for a spoiler, so to speak.
So from a grassroots standpoint, obviously the party represents a different mindset.
Absolutely. A very different mindset than we have today. We have this mindset today. You see, there's a problem in the electoral process, and that's been talked about as gerrymandering or redistricting.
Exactly.
And that happens every 10 years because we have the census and when the population shifts and so forth, and that has to be done. The corruption is that the party in power gets to draw those lines, and they draw the lines according to what's best for them, and oftentimes they do it to the extreme, and that's called gerrymandering, and that's really illegal. It's really unconstitutional. And in a couple other states, North Carolina and Virginia, the courts have gotten involved and have made the party in power redraw their lines. And our view is we have to take redistricting out of the hands of politicians in order to really make it fair. We have to have a separate commission of citizens that are not running for office, that can look at it more objectively and redistrict in that way. And because both parties are guilty of gerrymandering in history, the only way you're going to get this done is to have a Secretary of State, the chief election officer, who is from outside the two major parties. And the Green Party is the perfect party to do that. That's why I'm running on the Green. That's another reason why I'm running on the Green Party, because I think I can really make that happen.
When I'm listening to you and I'm thinking to myself that I think that's the thing most people want when it comes to politics.
Yeah.
They want a non-politician politician, I guess is the best way of saying it. And that's kind of what that sounds to me. It sounds like you're putting yourself in a position where you want to take the politics and put the power to the people.
That's right. We need to redraw those, the boundaries of politics need to be put more and more in the hands of the people.
Is that possible, George?
Well, I'm going to try, and it has been in the past. I mean, you have particular periods of time and particular issues which have been shaped by the people more than the politicians and been forced onto the people. And well, I think there's a lot of movements in the history of nonviolence in America, all the way back to colonial times, whether it be the women's rights movement, whether it be the labor movement, whether it be the United Farm Workers movement, California, whether it be the civil rights movement, and the people have stepped up in times of crisis. And I think we're in a time of crisis now. It's a different kind of crisis because it deals again with big money, and it deals with this gerrymandering issue, which is illegal. There are other voter problems that are issues which need to be addressed, and that is this idea that the voter register rolls can be purged or should be purged of people who haven't voted in the last few elections.
Yeah, I was in a conversation about that. If you haven't, because I know if you haven't voted over the last, I think, 10 years, then you have to get back into the process. Right. You're automatically purged. Or the last couple of presidential elections, I think that's what it is. You're purged. So in that context, a lot of folks will go to the polls thinking that they're still on the ballot, or they're not on the ballot, still on the register to be able to vote, and they find out when they get there, no, I'm not.
I know. And the problem in Indiana, you have to register 29 days in advance of the election in order to re-register. So if you show up at the polls and find out that you've been purged, you can't vote. Your right to vote has been taken away from you, and that's unconstitutional. And that's really what has been happening. There's also this voter cross-check system, which has been instituted that the current Secretary of State has supported. And that is, if you have a name that's similar of someone who lives in Ohio or a neighboring state, the theory is, and there's really no evidence to support this, but that someone from out of state can come in and vote for you if they have a name that's the same as you. And so they're purging people that are in this voter cross-check system. And that's another issue which I think is unconstitutional. So we want to know, we're going to fight this tooth and nail in the Green Party. If you or anybody shows up at the polls and to vote, they're a legitimate voter that was registered in the past, and you find your name's been purged from the list, and therefore you can't vote, therefore your right to vote has been taken away from you, then you should go to my website, www.wolfforindiana.com, and you should send us a message and tell you that that's happened to you, because we want to really make an issue out of that if that's happened to people, and we want to go fight for your right to vote.
and it's www.wolfe4indiana.com.
Right. And Wolfe has an E on the end, so remember that. Yeah.
Right. WOLFE.
Mm-hmm.
And you go to the website and find out more information and information about you and what you stand for and what you believe in. You know, one of the things, and here in the state of Indiana, a lot of folks know this, because we work really hard at trying to get the information out here. But a lot of folks in a lot of states, when you talk about if you've been a former felon, and having the right to vote. Well, of course, if you're a former felon, you've done your time and all those kinds of things, and you're off that part of it, then you're able to vote in the state of Indiana, but there's still challenges with that, and people are running into problems. What do you think about that?
Oh, I definitely think a felon who's done their time and redeemed themselves and is now an active citizen and worthy citizen, they should have the right to vote, and that shouldn't be questioned. That shouldn't be questioned.
Yeah, because there was an incident, I forget which city it was, but it was a young lady, who was actually on probation, but she went and she, voted in an election, and she, was arrested, and she now faces, faces like 5 years. Yeah. But here's the problem. When she got out, her parole officer, because she was on parole, and so, her parole officer didn't let her know, these are the things that you can or you can't do.
I see.
So no one educated her in the voting process. So in that context, because she was still on parole and still had some things that she had to, because you have to be completely clean, nobody told her that.
I see.
So then it turned out that she did a provisional ballot, and when she filled out that provisional ballot and they did the documentation and they tracked her down, they arrested her.
Well, they shouldn't arrest her.
And she faces like 5 years.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, if we want to know these stories in the Green Party, because we want to go to bat and fight for people's rights and right to vote and fight against those kind of injustices.
How do you?
That's what social justice is all about.
And I was gonna ask that, because one of the things I'm hearing, the Green Party is a party that doesn't want to look at politics the same anymore.
Right. We want to change the political culture. That's right.
And so a lot of times, in the history of this country, there have been, we hear about independent, candidates, independent parties that try to come up against the big two. And in some cases they have been successful. So let me ask you this. In your case, what do you think is going to make, if you want me to vote for you, what do I need to know about?
Well, first of all, if you look at my whole platform, which is 16 points, a lot of it deals with these voting issues. I want to make Election Day a statewide holiday. I want to make it easier for people to vote. I believe the Secretary of State should be an advocate for the voters, should go out and actually recruit people for into voting. We need to eliminate this purging kind of system that's been going on. It's discriminatory and happens to more disenfranchised lower income voters more than higher income voters, because lower income voters tend to move around a lot. Their daily dresses change, so forth. But I want to set up a redistricting commission, a nonpartisan redistricting commission represented by citizens. But in addition to that, there are other things. There are things like health care and so forth that we really need to push more, because universal health care is important and it's good for business. You see, there's a whole business division in the Secretary of State's office. And we've heard from the business community. Healthcare is good for business because people who are healthy miss less work, they're more productive, and so forth. Yeah. We need a hate crime bill if we're going to attract businesses and so forth. The business community is in favor of a hate crime bill, and yet it has failed to pass the General Assembly, even though there's been a supermajority of Republicans. I'm for the legalization of medical marijuana, and eventually, maybe the recreational marijuana, as we see how things go in Colorado and other states have done, and so forth. So if you look, we need to raise the minimum wage. We have to make our minimum wage competitive with local states or neighboring states. Michigan's minimum wage is $9.25. We really should have a minimum wage where everybody can make a living wage. But we're $7.25 at the moment, and to raise it abruptly is not good for the business community. But we should raise it so that it's competitive with Michigan, which is $9.25 an hour, and also link it to inflation so that every year there's an automatic adjustment, so that the minimum wage no longer becomes a political football. You know, both Republicans and Democrats have used the minimum wage as a political football. Right. It always happens in an election year. Right. I mean, it doesn't need to happen that way. We can make that adjustment. We can set a fair minimum wage for Indiana for its economy, and we can continue to work to better the lower income families.
So, and I'm glad when you talk about the minimum wage, because a livable wage is I think what people think about a lot of times.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's what we should be having.
I mean, and it's amazing that when we talk about a country that is so industrialized as we are and continue to be, it's just a different kind of industry now. Now we're moving into the technological aspect of things, but we still have service jobs and fast food jobs and things like that. I know people that have to have 2 or 3 jobs.
That's right. I know people, they're called the working poor. Yeah. The working poor.
Which is amazing.
And they're working hard, and they're barely making ends meet, even though they have 2 or 3 jobs. You're right.
Right.
We got, that's an injustice. That's another injustice we'd have to deal with. That's right.
So what would the state, as Secretary of State in the Green Party, if the Green Party if you're elected and you get into that position as the Green Party and you're looking at, you know, you're going to look at 2 different sides now, because you're still going to have a Democratic side and a Republican side to work with in the House and the Senate. How are you going to get them to be cooperative in a lot of the things you need to do?
Well, first of all, I really want to appeal to their conscience. I think deep down on the level of conscience, there's a lot of legislators today, a lot of politicians today who realize I'm right, that we need to do this. And the other thing I want to do is become an advocate for the voters, so that the voters know what the issues are and what the stances are, and they will then, I think, become much more pressure oriented, and as pressuring their legislators to get some of these things done. I think the Secretary of State can do a lot in terms of connecting with the voters and in terms of appealing to the conscience of the legislators.
We're talking to George Wolfe. He is a Green Party candidate for Secretary of State, and we are talking about some of the things that he would look at doing if elected as the Secretary of State, but also an explanation of what really the Green Party represents and what they stand for. Let me ask you this, George, also in the context of what you just spoke about. When you talk about making sure the voters and the folks in the community, what about that educational component? Because what it sounds like is you're going to have to put an educational component so the voters know and the community knows. Bottom line is, this is what I do, and this is what I'm doing it for.
Right. We're right on the same wavelength. That's what I was thinking. I was going to interrupt you and say I want to talk about education, but I don't need to do that. All right. There's these issues of education that I want to I would focus on. First of all, right now, DACA students. You're familiar with the DACA students,
yeah, absolutely.
Right? In Indiana is one of 5 states, only 5 states that require DACA students to pay out-of-state tuition. Wow. Even though they're living here and they've been raised here, they have to pay out-of-state tuition if they want to go to a public university. That's got to change. They should be paying in-state tuition. That's an injustice I would want to deal with. Another is, there's been emphasis in higher education over the past 10 years or so on what's called STEM degrees: science, technology, education, and math. That's what that stands for.
Right.
Well, in other states and in other colleagues I have in the field of education, what about the arts? What about the arts? That's where our identity comes from. That's how we know who we are as a culture.
Right.
Where the arts come from. So they wanted to add the arts to that so that the arts are treated on equal basis.
Okay.
And so they call it STEAM.
Right,
STEAM,
exactly.
STEM, science, technology, education, the arts, and math.
Right.
And we have to move full steam ahead to get the arts emphasized and bring them up on the same level, perceptive level, as the others. And then the other thing is, I think we need peace education in every high school. Every school.
Okay, so you said
curriculum in peace or nonviolent education.
Okay,
I've written a book on the subject. It's called The Spiritual Power of Nonviolence. If you Google it, you'll find it. And so I used to teach a class on the history and philosophy of nonviolence. That's how I was talking about the labor movement, women's rights movement, and so forth, all the way back to colonial times. We have a very proud history of nonviolent activism and success in that realm. And that people need to know that history as much as our military history.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
And so that's a curriculum, that's a course that needs to be required in every high school.
Yeah, because you hear that, you hear about the, as we jokingly say around here, his story, as in, the victors are the ones that are able to write the stories. The bottom line is they're going to tell about their victories and how they did it. And in most cases, the military in this country will talk about what they've done and not what they've done too.
Right.
And so to have, it's refreshing to hear a conversation when you talk about teaching peace instead of violence.
Right.
And
we have to understand too, there are three definitions of violence. One's the physical violence. We all know what that is. The other is psychological violence. That's bullying, name calling, intimidation, and so forth. And then the third is structural violence. Structural violence is the violence of oppression and discrimination.
Absolutely.
Physical violence, if you really look into the, recent shootings and crimes and so forth, the people who are involved in that were subjected to either structural or psychological violence first. If we're going to end violence, in addition to having sensible gun laws, which I talk about that sometime too, but we need to address the structural violence in our society and the psychological violence that goes on all the time, the bullying, the intimidation, and especially how that has infected social media.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And we were talking about the working poor. Well, that's a form of structural violence.
Absolutely.
And that became glaringly apparent during Hurricane Katrina. All these people couldn't leave. They couldn't leave not because they didn't have transportation. They were working people.
Right.
So you see, all these injustices, we need to bring them to the surface, get people talking about them, have conversations on radio like this show, and just generally create a kind of awareness which awakens the voters to put pressure on our legislators.
We've got about one more minute before we have to go. If folks want to find out more about George Wolfe and also the Green Party, what should they do?
The best way is go to the website, www.wolfforindiana.com. You'll get a lot of information there in terms of my positions on these various topics that we talked about. I'm really stating my positions clearly. I want people to know where I stand. There's no wishy-washy vagueness. This is where I stand, and I will continue to articulate that. And so if you go to my website, and just remember my name has an E on the end, that's the best way to start. And you can email the Green Party and email me there through that website, and I try to respond to everybody.
George, it's been it's refreshing to have a conversation with you.
Well, thank you.
And I love that the Green Party, when you talk about grassroots, it's it's kind of, it works together. Grassroots, green.
Yeah, it's good. I never thought of that.
So I'm looking at it that way. So thank you very much for sharing the information for us and with us, and let us know how things go.
Thank you. Appreciate it being here. Thank you.
We're going to be back with more Community Connection. We're going to be talking to some folks in just a moment from the Christian Theological Seminary.